Good afternoon. On the outboard flight, if somebody's sitting next to me and they say, "What do you do?" and I say, "Oh, I do martial arts," and they say, "I better watch what I do here." And on the inboard flight, if I say I'm a psychologist, they go, "I better watch what I say." So it's a great way to have your own space, right? on the flights. What I'd like to do this afternoon is make a few remarks about the people side of this threat and security environment that we're in. And General Schumacher, who was once head of Central Command, told me, he said, "We don't arm men, we man arms." We don't arm men, we man arms. Who are the people behind the technology? The other main distinction that I want to make here is that something Aristotle said 1,000 years ago, which is, we are what we practice. When you look at human beings, what you see is the practices that they've been in. We know through neuroscience, which now grounds it, is that the practices that we do will shape who we are. So the question that I'm submitting here in this short period of time is, are we in the right practices in this threat and security environment? And are we training our people, our leaders, and our management in a way that we can move most skillfully along this path? Where do I come from in speaking about this? As I said, I've been doing martial arts. This is always kind of an in-breath for me, which is I've been doing martial arts for over 50 years. I still train martial arts. I still practice martial arts. I have a teacher, and I teach martial arts. Started young and taught hand-to-hand combat in the Marine Corps, got different ranks, and now I'm married to martial art called Aikido, which I'm a 7th Dan in. And basically the learning there is it's been an ongoing practice of the study of conflict. It's been an ongoing practice of the study of threat for me. My dissertation in psychology was called the mind-body interface. And what I looked at was how do we, what the street would say now, how do we bring together our thinking, our actions, our emotions in a way that we're the most effective actors possible. And what I learned by that is that how important in leadership and management our moods and emotions are. Fundamentally, we're trained, and we're trained through our schools, we're trained through different management practices, that we're going to leave our emotions and our moods in the trunk of our car, and then we're going to go out and do something effective and willfully. And we know now that's just not the case. We have to include those aspects of ourselves. We know that 85% of physician visits now are because of people don't know how to manage their stress. So it's a huge loss of money, it's a huge loss of personnel. I've been in a meditation practice since 1970, which is now on the street called mindfulness. And we teach that. I used to say, when we would consult, we'd say we're going to do meditation. And you could see above everybody's head they saw the Beatles or somebody with a white beard or something like that. Yeah. Now it's on the cover of Time magazine and Scientific American. And what we know is that we can train our attention. And we know that people that are successful and fulfilled can train their attention. So these aspects of training our people in this environment, do we have a trained attention? Can we focus? Can we concentrate? Even when there's things that are grabbing us and different pressures, perceived or real threats, can we come back to the present moment and make the right decisions? Our emotions tell us what we care about. Our emotions or moods go off, we start circling the drain. Exemplary leaders, exemplary people know how to manage not only their moods and emotions, but they're able to develop an esprit or a sense of unity in the people that they lead. And the martial arts, sometimes the work that we do, we appropriate the principles from the martial arts. But basically it goes, how can you have minimal effort and maximum outcome? How can you observe moments of conflict to bring yourself back to what we call center, or the present moment, and then be able to continue to move the action downfield together. Two stories. Lieutenant Philip Duncan is leading his platoon through Fallujah. He had gone through the Marine Corps martial art program that I had the honor of helping to develop and implement with General Jones, which is actually a leadership program. But he's leading his platoon through Fallujah, rough neighborhoods, and around the corner comes a funeral procession, and what they see is they see the occupying force, Marine platoon. A lot of tension, more and more people are coming, they're waving sticks and yelling, and all of a sudden people have arms on the street. Lieutenant Duncan, what he does is he makes a decision in that moment, and he says to his platoon, everybody take a knee. They take a knee, they say, take off your helmet and bow your head. This moment of what is counterintuitive, do you think that should have happened, basically neutralized that moment of aggression and possible conflict that could happen. And for the rest of his deployment and his company's deployment in Iraq, they had the minimal violence, the minimal confrontations with the Iraqi people. And it was a moment really where he had to have a situational awareness, choose something outside of the box, take a certain kind of risk, but trust not only his training, his practices, but also how he saw the environment at that particular moment. Nancy Hudson, Senior Vice President at Pfizer, head of the R&D department in Mystic. We ran through scenarios with her around if all this chemical plant blew up, what do we do? What are the procedures and protocols? What we didn't do is we didn't just stay in an office or stay in the room and say, these are the things we have to do. You understand what I mean? It wasn't just like we're going to understand these things. We got people moving through those actions. They said, if this happened, if this chemical blew up, this building went on fire, what would they do? They actually went out and ran through that. 2 weeks later, that happened. 2 weeks later, almost that same scenario happened, basically because of the training that she went through. There was minimal structural damage and minimal human damage. So I tell you those stories because the neuroscience has taught us that when we're under threat, when we're under pressure, we don't rise to our level of hope. We don't rise to our level of expectation, or we don't rise to our level of desire. What we do is we precipitate to our level of training. That's where we go when we're under pressure. So again, I'll submit to you, the question is, what is the training or practices that your people are doing so that when that fire happens, when that crowd comes around the corner, when Genghis Khan comes over the hill, have you been in the right training? And that neuroscience has shown us that when we are under threat, real threat or perceived threat, what happens is that we have what is called an amygdala hijack. In that amygdala hijack, 4 things happen. If you're a human being with a human nervous system and a human brain, despite gender, race, class, ethnicity, geography, one of these things will happen to you. Darwin was right. You're going to fight. You're going to push ahead. Some of you will freeze. Some of you will run, flee. Some of you will disassociate. It's a given that will happen. That's how we're wired. That's how our nervous system and our brain is wired. We'll freeze, we'll fight, we'll flee, we'll disassociate. those things are hard-earned. In other words, those things, that level of conditioning that we have, we've gone down that route because it's brought us belonging, connection, love, dignity. That's what I mean by hard-earned. If you don't see that in yourself, you'll keep going down that track. So the training of a leadership presence or some kind of an exemplary a way of being in the world to lead people is you recognize that when you're under threat, and again, I will say real or perceived threat, that you can recognize in yourself where you go in all those. It's just absolutely critical that becomes necessary for you. You don't just recognize it as a cognitive understanding, but it's something that you can actually sense, feel, and see how it shifts your thinking and your perceptions. You then train what we appropriate from the martial arts, you train coming back to center. So coming back to center is a great bumper sticker. It's a great thing to put on your refrigerator, but it's more than an idea. It's actually a way of being. Understand what I'm saying? It's actually a way of being. And it's possible to train that. And what that means is you come back to the present moment. When you have the amygdala hijack, that's that little almond-shaped organ in the middle of our head, is that when you go, oh, there's threat out there, all those neurons are racing forward, they go through the amygdala. Amygdala says, for real. And you get hijacked. So you double your fist, blood pressure rises, you freeze, you go back, et cetera, et cetera. You notice when that happens, you come back to the present moment, and so that you can be present to the environment and to other people. You're open to possibilities. The blinders are off of you. You're open to possibilities, and you're connected to what you care about. You're connected to your commitment to your stakeholders, your commitment to your ethics, your commitment to the long-term strategy that you have in that moment. So I'll say again that the point here, the main distinction that I'm pointing to is, are you in the practices? As Aristotle said, we are the product of all of our practices. Are you and your people in the practices of being able to deal with threat in a way in which you can be present with it? You're in choice, you're not reacting. You're willfully engaging your choice in that matter, and you can continue to kick the ball downfield. For example, just free your hands for a minute. If you have a pen or something, free your hands. Yeah, good. Just put your hands out like this. This is a weird moment. It's all right. Yeah. Now put your hands together. Yeah. Let them go. Now, don't put them together like that now. Put them together a different way. Clasp the fingers together. Yeah, let's do it again, some of you. Here, let's go like this, yeah? Interlock your fingers. Feel how natural that is? That's what you've been practicing. Open them, and now put them together opposite that. Feel that moment of hesitation? That moment of hesitation? What we want to do in our management leadership is narrow that moment of hesitation. Narrow that moment of hesitation. It will happen, but we don't want to spend a minute there. We don't want to spend 5 minutes. We don't want to spend a year there. Going, how does this work? What we want to do is going, if I have to change and have my left forefinger on top, I'm going to do that enough times where it becomes what we say is embodied in you. So let me end with another story. Carl Furillo, right field player for the Brooklyn Dodgers, way back when it was in Ebbets Field. Very, very difficult field to play. And a young Howard Cosell interviewed him. I don't know if anybody's ever heard or seen this interview, but a young Howard Cosell interviewed him, and he was in awe of this. Carl Furillo's been an MVP, all-star for all these years, and he's kind of fawning over him, and he says, gee, Carl, nobody can play this right field fence like you can. You do it so easily. How did you able to do that? And Carl Furlow kind of screwed up his face and looked at me and said, I friggin' practiced. Yeah? Just like that. So again, what I want to say is, the distinction I have in a short period of time here is that let's take a really strong look that in this volatile, changing environment that we're in, are the practices that we're in the practices that are able to us to go across the goal line. And that goal line then going the next distance and the next distance and then the next distance. So this says I have 55 seconds. Do you have any questions? Okay. Yes, Maynard.
How would you assess our current leadership?
I would say our current leadership is it very much embodied the practices that he's been doing over decades. And that any kind of hope that we held out, or non-hope, that there would be a difference between the candidate and our president, we see what he's been practicing. And when there's a moment of pressure, when we get off script, look what comes forward. Sir.
What you talked about in the responses to perceived threat, just for all of us in our daily lives, what do you recommend just to make part of our own personal and professional lives to identify the real or perceived threat and then just kind of live more centered?
Yes. Yeah, thank you. Well, there's a couple of things I want to say about this notion of what we call, neuroscience will call the conditioned tendency, that under threat we'll always move down these certain routes, is that happens personally, it happens in organizations, it happens in institutions, and it happens in countries. And just us watching the news every day, we can see what those tendencies are and how they're moving. The first thing to do is to be able to notice in yourself and the people that you lead that when they're under pressure, what occurs to them? What happens to them? Do they disappear? Are they disassociating? Are they automatically fighting back? And then allow that to come to the surface so we begin to recognize that. So we can't change anything. We don't transform, modify, or change anything until we actually see what is. And then from there, we want to develop a set of practices so that when that occurs, we notice it and we come back more quickly. The practices will bring us back more quickly. We know now 3,000 repetitions brings you into minimal competency. 10,000 repetitions brings you into more levels of mastery. Noticing what your tendency is, what your people's tendency is, develop a training, a set of practices so that we can begin to see how this happens individually, how it happens on the team. Teams have this shape, organizations have this shape, institutions do too. And then once we notice those, we say, and are these movements, these actions going to take us where we want to go? And most often that they're not. They're because we've inherited them or we've adopted them. Yes, Nina.
Do you feel that incentives are fairly aligned right now with leadership? Because a lot of the leadership elements seem so cultural, right? I mean, we have a multicultural workforce. For instance, my reaction to fear is going to be based on how I respond or how I grew up or the environment I grew up in, you know, and so how do you address that, diversity?
It's, as you all know, the changing face of the workshop, the workplace, and what we're doing is that we have to develop a deeper sensibility and sensitivity that these conditioned tendencies also are shaped by religion, nationality, gender, class, et cetera, et cetera. So that all that has to be surfaced too. So somebody may be acting in a way that you would say, gee, they're really angry or they're really pissed off. But in their background of sensibility, it's not that at all. It's more like I'm just saying, pass the salt. I'm getting worked up. So we have to build a sensibility about how we're being shaped by all those other elements too. Thank you very much.